The escalation of the situation in Azov Sea.
They all understood what was at stake, that this is a case of acts of aggression against Ukraine.
Canada is helping a lot to Ukraine with army.
Operation Unifier consists of about 200 Canadian Armed Forces personnel.
Recently, cannabis was legalized in Canada for recreation use. And I heard about billions of dollars which government gets. Hello, I present today a new episode of Eurointegrators program, and my guest today is Ambassador of Canada in Ukraine, Mr. Roman Waschuk. Hello.
Great to be here.
The escalation of the situation in Azov Sea is now in all world media. Does Canadians understand what's going on, and what is your recommendation how to solve this problem?
I think Canadians, by and large, get it. I had the occasion to do briefings for two groups of Canadian parliamentarians from all of our political parties, and they all understood what was at stake, that this is a case of acts of aggression against Ukraine, in this case now on the part of the Russian FSB and other Russian state agencies. The Canadian media has also generally portrayed things, I would say, correctly, and there's a great desire to support Ukraine at this difficult time. What can be done? I think everybody's seen the various statements that have come out. Canada's was one of the strongest statements, but I think statements are not enough. I think Ukrainians are a bit tired of just hearing statements of concern, deep, utmost, whatever kinds of concern from people. So I was with our Minister of Foreign Affairs in Brussels at the NATO Foreign Ministers last week. She then went on to Milan, the OSCE meeting, and actively networking to move from statements to actions. We're working with some of our closer partners on a package. A bit early to say what it'll be, but certainly it would be things that would affect Russian interests and not only try to appeal to the better angels of President Putin's nature.
Okay, but we see that previous implemented sanctions, they are important, of course, but they're not really hurting Russian economy. Rather, oil prices are hurting there more. So it should be something more serious.
I think it should be something more directed. This is a shipping and naval crisis at the moment. So that's one of the things we're looking at, the sort of the maritime aspect of this. But again, I don't want to get out ahead of our ministers.
Until it will be voted, yeah. Canada is helping a lot to Ukraine with army, with reforms of army, with advisors, with the weapon. What is the main expectations in the next, in future?
Well, I think Operation Unifier consists of about 200 Canadian Armed Forces personnel who are in Ukraine. They generally are on 6-month rotations. We are now on rotation 7. So it's been going on since early 2015. We've seen major progress in how the Ukrainian military operates at the tactical level. I think we're now looking to see how can change happen at the more operational and strategic level. We were working on revising the Ukrainian curriculum for training sergeants and non-commissioned personnel, because that's really the kind of the sinews of a military that makes things happen or not. Depending on how you got it done. We've helped reshape a sniper school, and that links in turn then into the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense buying sniper rifles from Canadian manufacturers. So we like to look at it as capabilities. It's not just stuff, and it's not just training. All these things have to somehow fit together to be able to provide the deterrence that Ukraine needs.
When do you think Ukraine will be ready for more close cooperation with NATO?
Ukraine's already quite capable in a number of areas. Often these are political decisions that take into account a whole checklist of things that Ukraine has or hasn't done. The law on national security is a major step forward, but it in turn requires both the Ukrainian parliament and government to take a whole range of other measures. Make certain changes in how the SBU operates, look at the relationship between...
That was not reforms of SBU at all.
But the law on national security says there should be.
Yes.
Right. So basically, once you take step A, then you're also committed to taking step B and C. So these are the things that we're looking for in 2019 and 2020 and so on. So there's a range of things that still need to be done. We've had a Canadian general here who's been talking to people at Ministry of Defense and General Staff on how command and control issues can best be synergized here to maximize the resources you've got. There's no magic NATO formula. I think maybe sometimes in Ukraine there's a bit of an illusion that there's one single NATO model and that you just have to achieve it and then it's all done.
I think it's a lot of different KPIs, actually.
It's a lot of them, but also every country picks which ones are the most important for it. Canada does not have a big military. We can't do everything that every NATO KPI requires. So we pick from the menu those that make sense for us. And so partly it's a matter of working with Ukraine to figure out what is it that you need right now in the medium term and in the long term to have a sustainable force that actually deters outside aggression.
The question is, what do you think is lacking Ukraine in MOD or General Staff reform?
I think there needs to be more flexibility in thinking, in HR policy, something we ourselves discovered, let's say in the early and mid-2000s when we launched a large operation in Kandahar province in Afghanistan, that some of the old approaches and some of the old people that we had didn't work in what was a very rapid, kinetic environment. And I think that's part of the work that still needs to be done, and I think the MOD knows the roadmap, and it'll be a matter of working on that. One of the things you've got written into your laws in Ukraine is that there has to be a defense review after a presidential election. So that, I think, will be something people will be thinking long and hard about. Actually, not so long, because they've only got 3 months to do it, in the first half of 2019.
Do you think they're ready to change their old approaches to new?
I think that will depend on the political signals they get from the authorities. And they're certainly getting a lot of ideas about how you can do it from us and from other partners.
In Canada, the Ukrainian diaspora is quite big and influence, I believe, even sometimes political decision in parliament and also government decision.
Every Canadian influences decisions.
But there is also Russian diaspora. How do Russian diaspora see the situation in Ukraine?
I think they're like all other Canadians. There's a variety of views, and there are some people in the Russian community who've come out to demos in support of Ukraine. Others probably who hang out in the Russian internet or watch Russian TV and have a different approach, but they're not terribly loud and they're not terribly organized. So Canada is not a #1 country for Russian influence operations, I have to say. There's all three of our principal parties, and again, I personally experienced this in briefings with both our NATO Association and our Foreign Affairs Committee, are very solidly pro-Ukraine.
Why do you think Canada is not a battlefield for Russian influence operation?
Because one of the main weapons that Russia has in a number of countries is ignorance. The fact that people don't know about Ukraine. I mean, people in Canada know about Ukrainians, therefore they suspect that somewhere out there is a Ukraine. They consider the existence of Ukrainians and Ukraine to be normal. And that makes a Russian propagandist job way harder.
Okay, but still Canadian government allowed for Russian oligarchs to buy property in Canada through LLC or through offshore companies. It was the situation with the investment to Trump Tower in Toronto. What do you do with that?
Again, Canada is an open society with a multicultural immigration policy. So we have people coming from all over and doing all sorts of things, including investing. So, and unless there's proof of criminality, there's not a whole lot that we are.
So you're sure all this money are clean?
No. I think we have instruments like FinTrack, which is our financial tracking service, that are taking closer looks at some of these. Yeah, the Toronto development you mentioned, phase one of that development went broke, so it's now been rebranded as a different sort of hotel, different owners, and I think
non-investment from Russian government bank, VTB.
No, that is long gone. So I think we certainly are paying more attention. We're paying more attention to cyber threats. We're paying more attention to disinformation, both in the G7 context, where Canada leads the rapid response mechanism, but also in terms of using our own agencies within the Government of Canada to look at how we protect our own democratic system from infiltration and the fact that we have elections coming up ourselves in October 2019 means that we're also learning from what's happened in Ukraine and from the way Ukrainians have mobilized to defend themselves.
Do you have already some receipt? Because you mentioned that especially it's crucial before election, and we saw how it was in US even, how Russia influenced US or tried to influence US elections, then France, then Germany, now again big protests in France, then Catalonia, then Brexit. So it's quite a lot of different types of active measures or information measures. And Ukraine is coming to election. What is your recommendation to that?
We're not just recommending, we're planning to be useful. So we have a couple of projects lined up to help build Ukraine's cyber defenses, to also work with the Central Electoral Commission to ensure that interference becomes very, very difficult. We will be sending, we've already announced, significant election observer missions, up to 500 people total in 2019, with more time now for long-term observers, because the problems aren't just on election day, they're before, sometimes after. So we have a large package, I think it's about the equivalent of 24 million US dollars in support, both for the electoral process and to fight disinformation and cyber threats.
I think that's cyber leaks which they will use, they already done. That's what, from my opinion, how it will happen.
Well, then we need to help you find them.
Yes, at least not to repeat it in the next elections. Internet. I think one of our first discussion with you many years ago was about bullying in social networks, because you were personally several times under this threat situation. What is your recommendation? It's happened more often and often when you expose your opinion, which somebody or some bots do not like.
You've got to have a fairly tough skin, and you can't respond in the same way as the bullies try to provoke you. You've got to be reasoned, you've got to be pretty matter-of-fact, and you've got to be quick. Don't let misrepresentations just go viral around what you say. I mean, people in my family and at work laugh at me because I'm constantly checking on the feed. It's not just that I want to avoid work or not talk to people. It's also the fact that I want to be able to react or cut something off, cut something bad off before it really starts to spread.
How many minutes should be like?
Oh, well, you know, I think there's no hard and fast rule, but example, I was at an event where one of the candidates for president was speaking, and somebody took a picture of me and put it up and said, oh, look, here's an ambassador listening to a candidate. Is that the right thing for an ambassador to do? Is it proper? And I thought, okay, I don't need the whole вмешательство, подстрекательство thing here going on here. So I just responded to that person right away saying, observing, reporting, analyzing, it's my job. And isn't it that? And that kind of like your job too, Mr. Journalist. And he then responded and said, well, yeah, okay.
Oh, so it was journalist. It was a real person and journalist.
It was a real person. But I thought, you know, before the whole thing starts, people discussing it, people spinning it, I want my side of the story out there right away.
I think in crisis situation, it should be like maximum 2 hours.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it should be about comments, but...
I think I got it out in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
US is doing a lot for Ukraine, and Canada is doing not less, as far as I understand, especially in defense sphere. You are number 1 or number 2. Everybody knows about US involvement, thanks a lot to Russian propaganda, by the way.
Yes.
And almost nobody knows about such a big Canada involvement. Why? You are hiding that, or? No. We're just naturally modest. But I think those who follow the issues and are interested know. They also follow some of our social media accounts. Operation Unifier has its own account. Canadian Armed Forces in Ukraine, CAF in Ukraine. Whether it's Facebook, it's trilingual, it's English, it's French, it's Ukrainian. So you can follow them. But also, I think it's not a matter of trumpeting things, and we certainly don't want to make ourselves an object of somebody else's propaganda. It's getting the job done. We have a highly professional group of military people here, and they do outreach, and you know they've been doing things like helping the Jedalo Center for Children with Cerebral Palsy in Lviv. They've gone out and
told kids in schools about Canada. So we've got that sort of outreach. But the important thing is getting the job done. And when you're not a superpower, you're just haven't got a superpower profile.
About economical reform, I know that you support not only defense reforms but also economical support. Which type of reforms Canada support, and what is the result of that?
Well, I think we've had an advisor program called EDGE that has kind of come in quickly to ministries to help them make some key changes. E-health, which is the basis for the entire registration system for patients in Ukraine, is something that we helped launch. Similarly, Export Promotion Office, Ukraine Invest, which has brought several $100 million in investment into Ukraine. And again, Export Promotion Office, Ukrainian exports have been growing at 15-20% a year for the last 2 or 3 years. So we definitely see results there. E-services from the Ministry of Justice, the probation system for both youth and now for adults, people not being locked up in jail, but instead being helped to reintegrate back into society. That's helping actual people. Economic development projects in places from Melitopol to Kolomea. And again, we've seen some mayors who've been very effective now with decentralization. They've got the resources, and our projects then help give them the strategy, what to do with the budget they've now got. Now, before the problem was everybody had ideas, nobody had money. Now the money's there, some people say we have no ideas. So our projects are there to help people, not give them ideas necessarily, but how to frame and formulate their ideas.
Free trade agreement between Ukraine and Canada. What is the result of this agreement?
The results are trade is growing. First it broadens because people say, oh, here's a new market. Let's try, see if they want my furniture or my candies or my shoes, whatever. Those are some of the sectors we...
In numbers, please.
In numbers, okay. I think last year was about 300 million for Canada, 117 or something million for Ukraine. Obviously, Ukraine needs a little help in getting its numbers up. So we have a special project for that, Canada-Ukraine Trade Investment Support Project, a 5-year project. It's now in its 3rd year. And so we actually bring delegations of Ukrainian small and medium manufacturers and producers to Canada to help them find markets for their goods, generally higher value added, to make sure that more of the benefits accrue and stay here in Ukraine.
I heard that with IT, Ukraine also get almost 100 million deal
in service sales. They're very hard to track because especially all the freelancers don't exactly tell the government exactly how much they're selling. But yes, there's lots. I know just one big company bills more than $50 million a year for Canadian customers. So there's a lot. It is, again, high-wage jobs for Ukrainians in doing it, and it's basically brains being turned into export revenues.
Canadian investors who wants to work with Ukraine, what does they feel about the situation in the country, and what are the main problems or wins in Ukraine?
People see that there are opportunities here. Ukraine does not have a fantastic reputation as an investment destination, but what we're increasingly seeing are companies that, from Canada, that have international experience, that know how to measure risk, that know how to find the right consultants, the right lawyers, to make sure that they set themselves up right and they set themselves up for success here. One of the things they've been doing is not setting up greenfield, but looking at transparent, well-run, proven Ukrainian companies that you can either buy some of or buy all of, because they have a proven track record with management that knows what it's doing in Ukrainian conditions. You're not sending in somebody from a different planet and telling them become successful in Ukraine. You're actually giving capital to Ukrainians who know what they're doing. So I would say Fairfax Financial from Canada, with its investments in Astarta, which is an agri-food company, Colonnade Insurance, now AXA Insurance, which is the biggest insurer in Ukraine. These are people who have spent years developing a strategy for how to work the Ukrainian market. Brookfield, which is Canada's and on some days the world's biggest real estate company, with the IT park in Lviv. Again, a big project, about 170 million US, as an innovation platform that will ultimately create about 14,000 jobs.
Do Canadian companies have some problem with keeping qualified personnel in Ukraine?
From what I understand, from those I've talked to, it's not a big problem yet, but I can see it coming. And I think Ukraine needs to get ready for the fact that it's already part of a globalized labor market, certainly when it comes to Central and Eastern Europe. And you also need to start thinking about how do you prepare to welcome some incoming labor to replace some of the Ukrainians who've gone somewhere else.
Recently, cannabis was legalized in Canada for recreation use. How much, and I heard about billions of dollars which government get because of giving licenses and getting that from dark market. I know it's only 1.5 months, but what is the result? First result?
It seems to be working fairly smoothly. I mean, we already had for about just over 15 years, legalized medical marijuana, so we already have the practice of licensing and regulating producers of medical marijuana. Now we've moved to the recreational phase. Yeah, it's to bring both the consumers out of the shadows and out of criminalization, but also then the producers and the marketers. So we have in some provinces even the government, which is marketing marijuana and controlling it. In some provinces, it's the private sector. Some provinces, it's a combination of the above. So we have different models in our federation of how people are doing it. Yes, we do see it as a multi-billion sector. A number of Canadian companies are now also thinking of going global. There's one that's also thinking of investing in non-narcotic cannabis production in Ukraine. So yes, we're seeing it as an opportunity for controlled, legal, safe production and use of both medicinal, recreational, and non-narcotic cannabis.
One more guest will join our interview now. It's Taras Ratushnyy, the head of Medical Cannabis Association of Ukraine. Taras, привіт.
Taras, hello. Good afternoon, Tetiana. Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. Tell me, what do you know about this transition in Canada, and what economic effect could a similar change bring about in Ukraine?
First
of all, you need to actually have a research subject in order to measure its economic effect. The subject you're currently discussing in Canada, the event which took place on October 17th, concerns the economic model of recreational cannabis for adults. Basically, the state establishes control over the legal turnover. In Canada, there is a government agency, Health Canada, which owns monitoring tools to which Canadians of legal age entrust highly sensitive personal information. And so, specifically last year, Health Canada was able to determine that Canadians spent $5.7 billion on cannabis, primarily for non-medical use. And these are, in fact, government statistics. There are no such figures calculated in Ukraine because the state does not have any objective data. It's also a very important point that in Canada, medical cannabis, that is control-limited economic turnover proceeding from sales for medical use, began in 2001, if I'm not mistaken. It is medical cannabis that could be substantively calculated approximately for Ukraine. If we look at or use an analogy on a demographic principle, because Canada is proportionate in population to Ukraine, or the physiological principle, because Canadians suffer generally from the same diseases as Ukrainians. We know that in Canada there are now 330,000 registered patients in medical cannabis programs. And these are, of course, not all medical cannabis patients, but only those who are officially registered. And if Health Canada predicts that overall such patients could number from 1,800,000 to 2.5 million, according to various estimates, in principle we could apply this data to our own situation and say that this is approximately what the results would be here, and our estimate is also about 2 million. That is the ceiling of this market's potential.
А правильно я розумію, що держава заробляла на тому, що продавала як дозволи на...
Do I understand correctly that the state earned from selling permission to sell and grow? Also, legalization. As far as I understand, only a partial market is legalized. And of course, unfortunately, maybe 70% of the above amount is legalized. So we're talking about some pretty big numbers of up to 10 billion if we add medical, even if it's only about, let's say, maybe 6 say 6 billion, but Taras, can you comment on these numbers? Because these figures really struck me. In Canada, as of last year, there were 89, if memory serves me, licensed manufacturers. That is, companies that had paid for licenses, for the right to participate in this legal turnover for medical purposes, since that was the only legal use at that time. And ultimately, since there were adequate, capable tools for assessing the monitoring data, it was found that these 89 companies provide only 10% of the total market volume, the remaining 90% proceeding from gray or even black sources. Last year, there was no legalization yet? Well, there was medical. Yes, there was medical legalization, not recreational. Thank you very much, Taras, for joining us.
Mr. Waschuk, in your last year in Ukraine, would be your wish for Ukrainians in the year of 2 elections, actually? What do you wish them?
Keep your sense of humor and try and build trust. Maybe you can't start right away at the electoral level, but in your families, in your communities, in your non-governmental organizations, build trust and build hope for the future. That's what I would wish people.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to our program. Thanks to all who watched us. See you next week.